Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Life. Lloyd Sears stood in the marble-floored entrance of his estate, adjusting his cufflinks as he prepared for another day commanding his private security empire. At 38, he had built Sears Tactical Solutions from nothing into the most feared and respected private military contractor on the East Coast. His piercing gray eyes and battle-hardened physique spoke of a man who had earned his reputation through blood and steel, not boardroom politics. The morning sun filtered through bulletproof windows, casting shadows across framed photographs of successful operations, hostage rescues, corporate extractions, high-value target eliminations. Lloyd's company didn't just provide security. They solved problems that governments couldn't touch officially. Daddy. 8-year-old Amelia Klein Sears rushed down the spiral staircase, her blonde curls bouncing as she threw herself into his arms. Lloyd's granite expression softened as he caught his daughter, the only person who could melt the ice around his heart. "Morning, princess," he murmured, kissing her forehead. "Ready for school? Can't you take me today? Please." Amelia's blue eyes, so much like her mother's, pleaded with him. Before Lloyd could answer, Stephanie Richard Sears descended the stairs with practiced elegance. At 32, she still possessed the stunning beauty that had captivated him during their college years. Her auburn hair was perfectly styled, her designer dress impeccable. She had been his anchor through the darkest operations, the woman who reminded him what he was fighting to protect. "Your father has important meetings today, sweetheart," Stephanie said, her voice carrying a strange edge Lloyd couldn't place. "Roland will drive you." Roland Keenan, Lloyd's most trusted lieutenant and childhood friend, emerged from the kitchen. The former Navy SEAL had saved Lloyd's life in 3 different countries and had been his right hand for over a decade. His loyalty was absolute, or so Lloyd believed. "Ready when you are, little boss." Roland grinned at Amelia, but Lloyd noticed his friend avoided eye contact. Lloyd kissed Stephanie goodbye, noting how she stiffened slightly at his touch. "I'll be home late. The Pentagon briefing ran long yesterday." "Of course you will," she replied, her smile not reaching her eyes. As Lloyd drove toward his headquarters, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting beneath the surface of his carefully constructed world. His phone buzzed with a message from his intelligence analyst. "Package delivered to your office. Eyes only." The package contained photographs and a USB drive. Lloyd's blood turned to ice as he scrolled through images of Stephanie entering a hotel with Chad Rodriguez, the ambitious district attorney who had been building his political career by prosecuting Lloyd's competitors. The timestamps showed the affair had been going on for 8 months. But it was the audio files that truly shattered his world. Stephanie's voice, breathless with passion. "Soon, Chad. Lloyd's getting too close to things he shouldn't. Your contacts in Washington are getting nervous." Chad's response was like a knife to Lloyd's heart. "My father-in-law, the governor, is handling it. Lloyd won't be a problem much longer. Then we can be together properly, and I can adopt Amelia." The final recording made Lloyd's hands shake with rage. "Roland's already planted what we need. Lloyd trusts him completely. He'll never see it coming." Lloyd sat in his office as the sun set, staring at the evidence of the ultimate betrayal. His wife, his best friend, and a prosecutor working together. But for what? His empire was legitimate now, his operations sanctioned. Then he found the answer in Chad's final message to Stephanie. "The Kazakhstan operation files you copied will be enough. We frame him for war crimes. I get the conviction that launches my gubernatorial campaign, and we inherit everything." 3 years ago, Lloyd's team had eliminated a terrorist cell that had been trafficking children. The operation had been brutal but necessary. Now they planned to paint it as an illegal assassination, using forged evidence and Stephanie's access to his personal files. Lloyd made a decision that would define the rest of his life. If they wanted to play with fire, he would show them what a real monster looked like. But first, he needed to disappear before their trap closed. Chapter 2. The Frame Titans. 3 weeks later, Lloyd watched from the shadows as federal agents swarmed his estate. He had spent those weeks meticulously planning, liquidating assets through untraceable channels, and positioning himself for what was to come. The charges were exactly what he'd expected: war crimes, illegal assassinations, and conspiracy. Stephanie played her part perfectly, sobbing for the cameras as she denounced her monster husband. "I had no idea," she wept into Chad Rodriguez's arms. He kept me in the dark about everything. I'm just grateful Amelia and I are safe now. Chad stood beside her, his arm protectively around her shoulders, speaking to reporters. Lloyd Sears is a dangerous man who used his military connections to commit unspeakable acts. As district attorney, I will ensure he faces the full weight of justice. But Lloyd had prepared for this moment. Hidden in an abandoned warehouse across the city, he activated equipment that would have impressed his former Pentagon contacts. Multiple screens flickered to life, showing surveillance feeds from his home, Chad's office, and dozens of other locations. Roland appeared on one screen, meeting with federal prosecutors. Lloyd listened through directional microphones as his former friend provided crucial evidence about Lloyd's illegal operations. He's completely unstable, Roland told the prosecutors. The man I once knew died somewhere in those foreign wars. He's been planning something big. I think he was going to eliminate witnesses. Lloyd almost smiled at the irony. He was indeed planning to eliminate witnesses, but not the ones they thought. The trial was a media sensation. Chad Rodriguez prosecuted with righteous fury, painting Lloyd as a psychopathic killer who had used his company as cover for international crimes. Stephanie testified tearfully about her husband's growing paranoia and violence, claiming she feared for her and Amelia's lives. The forged evidence was masterful: communications logs, financial records, even video footage that had been expertly manipulated. Lloyd's own legal team seemed to be going through the motions, another detail that confirmed how deep the conspiracy ran. On the witness stand, Roland delivered the killing blow. Lloyd Sears once told me that laws were for weak men. He said he was judge, jury, and executioner. I believe he was planning to kill anyone who could expose him. Throughout the trial, Lloyd remained silent, his cold eyes never leaving the faces of his betrayers. The media painted his silence as arrogance, but those who knew him recognized it as the calm before a terrible storm. The verdict was inevitable: guilty on all counts. As the judge read the sentence, death by lethal injection, Lloyd finally spoke, his voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Stephanie shuddered at those words, remembering the man she had once loved and the darkness she had glimpsed in him during their marriage. But Chad squeezed her hand reassuringly. Lloyd was finished, and they had won. 6 months later, Chad Rodriguez was elected governor of the state in a landslide victory, his prosecution of the monster Lloyd Sears launching him to political stardom. He and Stephanie married in a lavish ceremony, adopting Amelia and changing her name to Amelia Rodriguez. But in his cell on death row, Lloyd Sears was far from finished. He had spent those months setting pieces in motion, using connections his betrayers had forgotten he possessed. The game was just beginning. Chapter 3: Death Row Orchestration. Death Row was not the ending Lloyd's enemies had planned. It was his base of operations. Within weeks of his arrival, he had established himself as the undisputed power broker among the condemned. His reputation and resources made him valuable to men who had nothing left to lose. Trevor Clark, a former mob enforcer, became Lloyd's first lieutenant. The man had been betrayed by his own family and understood the need for absolute justice. Through Trevor, Lloyd gained access to a network of criminals who owed favors to dead men. "You're different from the rest of us," Trevor observed during one of their conversations in the exercise yard. "You're not here because you lost control. You're here because you let them think they won." Lloyd's smile was arctic. "Sometimes you have to lose a battle to win a war." Through carefully cultivated guards and a network that reached far beyond the prison walls, Lloyd began gathering intelligence on his targets. What he discovered exceeded even his darkest expectations. Chad Rodriguez had not just stolen Lloyd's wife and framed him. He had been systematically eliminating anyone connected to Lloyd's legitimate operations. Former clients, employees, even their families had suffered accidents or suicides. The man was covering his tracks by murdering dozens of innocent people. Stephanie was not the helpless victim she portrayed. Intelligence reports revealed she had been Chad's inside contact for 2 years, feeding him information about Lloyd's operations and client lists. She had orchestrated the deaths of people who had trusted her husband with their lives. Most devastating of all was the discovery about Amelia. Medical records Lloyd obtained through his networks revealed the truth. His daughter wasn't his biological child. Stephanie had been pregnant with Chad's child when she married Lloyd, using the pregnancy to trap him into marriage while Chad built his political career. The revelation should have broken Lloyd, but instead it crystallized his resolve. Amelia was innocent in all this, but she was not his responsibility. The little girl he had loved was a lie, part of an elaborate deception that had cost hundreds of lives. For 18 months, Lloyd orchestrated his revenge from death row. Money flowed through untraceable channels to place his people in key positions. Information was gathered, weaknesses identified, pressure points mapped. Every move was calculated for maximum devastation. His first strike came 6 months before his scheduled execution. Chad's younger brother, Martin May Rodriguez, died in what appeared to be a random mugging gone wrong. In reality, Lloyd's associates had eliminated Chad's political bagman, the one person who knew where all the campaign finance bodies were buried. The second strike followed a month later. Roland Keenan's girlfriend, Vera Fox, died in a car accident caused by brake failure. The message was clear: Lloyd could reach anyone, anywhere. But the real masterpiece was yet to come. Lloyd had discovered that Chad's rise to power was built on more than just prosecuting Lloyd. The man had been taking contracts from foreign interests, using his political position to eliminate threats to international criminal organizations. Lloyd had evidence that would not only destroy Chad, but implicate half the state's political establishment. 3 days before his execution, Lloyd received an unexpected visitor, Stuart Pruitt, Chad's campaign manager and the man who had coordinated the frame job. The man was pale, sweating despite the cool air. "What do you want?" Stuart asked, his voice shaking. Lloyd leaned forward, his eyes boring into the man's soul. "I want you to deliver a message to your masters. Tell them that everything they've built is about to fall. Tell them that Lloyd Sears doesn't forgive, and he doesn't forget." "You're finished," Stuart tried to bluster. "In 3 days, you'll be dead." Lloyd's smile was genuinely terrifying. "Death is just another deployment, Stuart. And I've never failed a mission." The night before his execution, Lloyd made his final preparations. Phone calls were made through encrypted channels, final payments transferred, and last instructions given. Tomorrow, the world would see what happened when you betrayed Lloyd Sears. He closed his eyes and thought of the faces of those who had wronged him. By this time tomorrow, their perfect world would be crashing down around them. Justice was coming, and it would be absolute. Chapter 4: The Final Performance. The execution chamber was filled with witnesses, reporters, victim family representatives, and members of the political establishment who wanted to see Lloyd Sears finally silenced. Chad Rodriguez sat in the front row, his arm around Stephanie, with 10-year-old Amelia between them. Lloyd was strapped to the gurney, for lines already inserted. The warden, Benjamin Holt, approached with the traditional offer of final words. But before Lloyd could speak, Warden Holt made an unusual announcement. "Mr. Sears has requested to make a final phone call, as permitted by state law. The governor has approved this request." Chad's face paled slightly, but he maintained his composure. What could Lloyd possibly accomplish with one phone call? The phone was brought to Lloyd's ear, and his cold voice filled the chamber through the speakers. "This is Lloyd Sears. Activate Protocol 7. Somewhere in the state capitol, servers hummed to life and encrypted files began uploading to news outlets, law enforcement agencies, and federal databases simultaneously. Lloyd's final operation had begun. The warden moved to continue the execution process, but was interrupted by Chad himself rising from his seat. "Wait," Chad said, his political instincts sensing an opportunity. He approached the gurney, Stephanie and Amelia following. "Since this is being broadcast live, I want to look this monster in the eye and tell him exactly what I think of him." Lloyd's eyes found Chad's, and his voice was utterly calm. "Your ex-wife and her husband, the governor who signed your execution order." Chad's confidence faltered at the strange phrasing, but he pressed on. "Any last words, cop killer? I'm raising your daughter to be ashamed of your name." It was then that Amelia, the little girl who had once called him Daddy, stepped forward with tears in her eyes. "Daddy, I love you." Stephanie's response was sharp and immediate. "Don't talk to him. He's already dead." Lloyd's eyes moved from face to face. Chad, thinking he had won. Stephanie, believing she was safe. Amelia, an innocent caught in the web of lies. His voice, when it came, was soft but carried clearly through the chamber. "They had no idea who I really was." At that moment, across the state, Lloyd's final operation reached completion. Every news outlet simultaneously received irrefutable evidence of Chad Rodriguez's crimes. Video footage of him ordering the murders of Lloyd's former employees, financial records showing payments from foreign criminal organizations, and audio recordings of him planning Lloyd's frame job. But the revelation that destroyed everything was the medical evidence Lloyd had been saving. DNA tests proving that Amelia was Chad's biological daughter, and that Stephanie had used the pregnancy to manipulate Lloyd into marriage while Chad built his political career in the shadows. The execution chamber erupted in chaos as phones buzzed with breaking news alerts. Chad's face went white as he realized what was happening. Stephanie grabbed Amelia, trying to shield her from the sudden attention of cameras and reporters. "You bastard," Chad whispered, approaching the gurney. "Even now, you're trying to destroy everything I've built." Lloyd's smile was serene. "I'm not trying to destroy anything, Chad. I'm simply revealing the truth. The question is, are you going to kill me in front of your daughter and the cameras? Or are you going to let the world see what kind of man you really are?" The warden tried to restore order, but reporters were already shouting questions. Federal agents were arriving to arrest Chad based on the evidence that was flooding every major news outlet. Stephanie was crying, not from grief, but from the realization that their carefully constructed life was crumbling in real time. "The execution is postponed pending federal investigation," announced a newly arrived FBI director. Chad Rodriguez was being led away in handcuffs, his political career over, his freedom forfeit. As Lloyd was unstrapped from the gurney, he heard Amelia's voice one last time. "I don't understand what's happening." Lloyd looked at the little girl who had once been his whole world, knowing now that she had never been his daughter, that her love had been based on a lie. His voice was gentle but final. "Sometimes adults do terrible things, Amelia. And sometimes those things have consequences." Stephanie was holding the girl protectively, but Lloyd felt no sympathy for either of them. They were part of the deception that had cost innocent lives. His war was not with a child, but she was not his child to protect anymore. Chapter 5. The Reckoning unfolds. The media called it the death row revelation, the most spectacular political downfall in state history. Within hours of the evidence release, a dozen high-ranking officials had been arrested. Chad Rodriguez's criminal empire, built over years of corruption and murder, collapsed like a house of cards. Lloyd was transferred to federal custody, pending a complete review of his case. The evidence that had convicted him was being systematically proven false, but Lloyd showed no emotion about his potential freedom. His focus remained on ensuring every aspect of his revenge was completed. From his new federal holding cell, he watched the news coverage with cold satisfaction. Chad Rodriguez was being held without bail on charges of murder, conspiracy, and treason. The man who had planned to ride Lloyd's conviction to the governor's mansion was now facing the death penalty himself. Stephanie faced her own reckoning. The revelation that she had systematically betrayed her husband's clients to facilitate their murders made her a target for federal prosecution and international assassins. The families of Chad's victims wanted blood, and hiding behind the facade of the grieving widow was no longer possible. But Lloyd's revenge was more sophisticated than simple criminal prosecution. He had spent 2 years ensuring that every aspect of their lives would be destroyed, not just their freedom. Roland Keenan, once Lloyd's most trusted friend, found himself facing a different kind of justice. The mercenary contacts Lloyd had cultivated over the years made it clear that betraying Lloyd Sears carried a price that transcended legal consequences. Roland's reputation in the private military world was destroyed, his career over, his life in constant danger from those who valued loyalty above all else. 3 weeks after the execution chamber revelation, Lloyd received a visitor, Julius Calhoun, the federal prosecutor reviewing his case. The man was clearly uncomfortable, knowing that Lloyd's conviction had been a massive miscarriage of justice. "The charges against you are being dropped," Julius announced. The evidence was fabricated, the witnesses perjured themselves, and the prosecution was corrupted from the beginning. "You're free to go." Lloyd's expression didn't change. "What about compensation for the 2 years of my life they stole?" "The state will offer a substantial settlement." "I don't want their money," Lloyd interrupted. "I want something else." Julius leaned forward, curious despite himself. "What?" "I want 5 minutes alone with Chad Rodriguez before his trial begins." The prosecutor's eyes widened. "That's impossible. And probably illegal." Lloyd's smile was patient. Nothing is impossible for a man with the right connections, Julius. And I've had 2 years to cultivate very specific relationships. That evening, through a series of carefully orchestrated events, Lloyd found himself in the federal holding facilities interrogation room with Chad Rodriguez. No cameras, no guards, no witnesses, just the two men who had been circling each other for years. Chad looked haggard, his political polish stripped away by weeks of solitary confinement and the knowledge that his empire had crumbled. "What do you want, Lloyd?" "I want you to understand exactly what you've lost," Lloyd replied calmly. "Your political career is over. Your criminal organization is destroyed. Your associates are either dead or in custody. But that's not enough. What more can you take from me?" Chad asked, desperation creeping into his voice. Lloyd leaned across the table. "Your daughter will grow up knowing her father is a murderer. Stephanie will spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, knowing that the families of your victims want revenge. And you'll spend the next 20 years on death row, watching everything you cared about disappear piece by piece." Chad's composure finally cracked. "You destroyed an innocent child's life out of spite." Lloyd's voice was ice. "Amelia was never my daughter. She was part of your deception from the beginning. I have no obligation to protect the offspring of my enemies." "She loved you," Chad whispered. "She loved a lie," Lloyd replied. "Just like I did. The difference is, I learned from my mistake. You're still believing your own deceptions." As Lloyd stood to leave, Chad made one last desperate plea. "What if I can give you something? Information about operations you don't know about." Lloyd paused at the door. "The only thing I want from you, Chad, is to watch you realize that I always win. Every move you made, every betrayal you orchestrated, every murder you ordered, it all led you to this moment. You didn't just frame an innocent man. You challenged Lloyd Sears. And that was your fatal mistake." Chapter 6. Empire's End. 6 months after Lloyd's release, the final pieces of his revenge fell into place. Chad Rodriguez's trial had become a global sensation, with evidence of his international criminal connections exposing corruption that reached the highest levels of government. Stephanie Richards Rodriguez faced her own trial, charged as a co-conspirator in multiple murders. The woman who had once lived in luxury as Lloyd's wife now sat in an orange jumpsuit, her beauty faded by the stress of constant threats from victims' families and the weight of her guilt. Lloyd watched the proceedings from the gallery, his presence a constant reminder to both defendants that their downfall had been orchestrated by the man they had tried to destroy. When reporters asked him about attending every day of the trials, his response was simple: "I want to see it finished." The revelation about Amelia's paternity had been devastating for the child. Now 11 years old, she had been placed in protective custody after threats against Chad's family escalated. The little girl who had once called Lloyd daddy was now a pawn in a game whose rules she couldn't understand. During a recess in Chad's trial, Stephanie approached Lloyd in the courthouse hallway. She looked broken, aged beyond her years by the stress of imprisonment and the knowledge that her carefully constructed life had been built on murder and lies. "She asks about you," Stephanie said quietly. "Amelia. She doesn't understand why you won't see her." Lloyd's expression remained impassive. "Because she's not my daughter. She never was. That child is the product of your deception and Chad's manipulation. My responsibility to her ended the moment I learned the truth." "She's innocent in all this," Stephanie pleaded. "Whatever you think of us, she didn't choose any of this." "Neither did the dozens of people you helped Chad murder," Lloyd replied. "Neither did I when you framed me for crimes I didn't commit. Innocence is a luxury that ends when you become part of someone else's war." Stephanie's composure cracked. "You used to be a good man, Lloyd. What happened to you?" Lloyd's smile was genuinely terrifying in its complete lack of warmth. "You did, Stephanie. You and Chad killed the good man I used to be. What stands here now is what you created, a man who understands that mercy is weakness and forgiveness is surrender. So this is who you are now? A monster who destroys children because of their parents' sins." "I'm not destroying Amelia," Lloyd said calmly. "I'm simply removing myself from her life, just as you removed me from mine. The difference is, she'll grow up knowing the truth about her parents. That's more honesty than I ever got from you." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of federal marshals escorting Stephanie back to custody. As she was led away, she turned back one final time. "I hope someday you find peace." Lloyd's response followed her down the hallway. Peace is for people who have something left to lose. The trials concluded with both Chad and Stephanie receiving life sentences without parole. The death penalty had been avoided due to plea agreements, but Lloyd felt no disappointment. Death would have been merciful compared to spending decades in maximum security prisons, surrounded by the families of their victims' fellow inmates. Roland Keenan had fled the country, but Lloyd's international connections ensured that his former friend would never find true safety. Reports filtered back periodically of Roland being spotted in various countries, always looking over his shoulder, always moving, never able to trust anyone completely. On the day of sentencing, Lloyd stood outside the courthouse and made his only public statement about the ordeal. Justice isn't always swift, and it isn't always pretty, but it is inevitable. Lloyd Sears doesn't forgive, and he doesn't forget. Remember that before you cross him. As he walked away from the courthouse, Lloyd's phone buzzed with a text message from an encrypted number. New contract available. High-value targets in Eastern Europe. Interested? Lloyd smiled and typed back, send details. The man who had once built a life around love and trust was gone forever. In his place stood something harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. Lloyd Sears had learned that in a world full of betrayers and liars, the only person you could trust was yourself, and the only justice you could count on was the justice you created with your own hands. His war with Chad and Stephanie was over. But there were other wars to fight, other wrongs to right, other enemies who needed to learn what happened when you crossed the wrong man. Chapter 7. The Innocent Pawn. 2 years after the trials, Lloyd received an unexpected letter at his new secure compound. The return address showed it came from a juvenile facility where Amelia Rodriguez had been placed after both her parents were imprisoned. The 13-year-old girl had written to the man she still considered her father, despite learning the truth about her parentage. Dear Daddy. The letter began, and Lloyd felt nothing at the words that would once have melted his heart. I know you're not my real father, but you're the only father I remember. Everyone here says I should hate you for what happened to Mom and Chad, but I don't understand why. You were always good to me. I miss our Saturday morning pancakes and the way you used to read me stories. I dream about our house sometimes and pretend none of this ever happened. Lloyd read the letter once, then fed it into his paper shredder without a second thought. The child's pain was irrelevant to him now. She was a product of deception, a living reminder of how thoroughly he had been betrayed. Her suffering was simply collateral damage in a war she had unwittingly been born into. But Amelia didn't give up. Letters arrived weekly, then daily. Each one pleaded for contact, for explanation, for some acknowledgement of the years they had shared. Lloyd destroyed them all without reading past the first few lines. The facility's social workers reached out, explaining that the girl was struggling with abandonment issues and identity crisis, but Lloyd refused all contact. 6 months later, the letters stopped. Lloyd assumed the child had finally accepted reality and moved on. He was wrong. On a cold October evening, Lloyd returned to his compound to find a teenage girl sitting on his doorstep. Amelia had grown tall and thin, her blonde hair darker now, her eyes holding a pain that seemed far too old for her 13 years. She looked up at him with desperate hope. I ran away, she said simply. I had to see you. I had to know why you won't talk to me. Lloyd's security team emerged from concealment, but he waved them back. He looked down at the girl who had once been the center of his world, feeling nothing but cold analysis. She was a security risk, a potential weakness his enemies could exploit. How did you find this place? He asked. I remembered things you taught me about tracking and observation. You used to say I was smart. Her voice wavered with hope that he might acknowledge some positive memory. I taught Lloyd Sears's daughter those things, he replied coldly. You're not his daughter. Amelia flinched as if he had struck her. But you raised me. You loved me. Doesn't that count for anything? Lloyd knelt to her eye level, his voice clinically detached. Love based on lies isn't love, Amelia. It's manipulation. Everything you remember about our relationship was built on your mother's deception. The man who read you stories and made you pancakes was living a lie, loving a child who wasn't his while being systematically betrayed by everyone he trusted. But I didn't lie to you, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I was just a little girl. You were Chad Rodriguez's daughter pretending to be mine, Lloyd corrected. Your very existence was part of their plan to control me. Every, I love you, Daddy, was unknowingly participating in the greatest betrayal of my life. Amelia's composure shattered completely. Please don't say that. Please don't make me feel like my whole childhood was fake. You're the only good thing I remember about my life. Lloyd stood, his decision made. Your childhood was fake, Amelia. Your parents are murderers who used you to manipulate me into protecting their crimes. I have no obligation to comfort you about that reality or to maintain connections to the biggest mistake of my life. He turned toward his compound's entrance, but Amelia's desperate voice stopped him. What am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to go? Everyone in my life is gone. Lloyd paused, but didn't turn around. Survive. Adapt. Learn that the world is cruel and that trust is a weakness people will exploit. Or don't. Your choices and your survival are no longer my concern. You're really going to leave me out here alone? The disbelief in her voice was heartbreaking. I'm going to call the facility to pick you up. After that, if you contact me again, I'll have you arrested for trespassing and harassment. Lloyd Sears protects what's his. You never were. As Lloyd walked into his compound, leaving Amelia crying on his doorstep, he felt no guilt or regret. The child was a living symbol of his greatest failure, allowing love and trust to blind him to betrayal. He had learned from that mistake and would never repeat it. 30 minutes later, facility staff arrived to collect Amelia. As they drove away, Lloyd watched from his security monitors. The girl looked back at his compound until it disappeared from view, probably hoping he would change his mind and come after her. He deleted the security footage and returned to planning his next operation. Sentiment was a luxury he could no longer afford, and Amelia Rodriguez was a reminder of weaknesses he had surgically removed from his character. Chapter 8: Blood and Betrayal. 3 years later, Lloyd's reputation as the most ruthless contractor in the private military world was legendary. His compound had become a fortress where the world's most dangerous clients came to hire the man who never failed a mission and never showed mercy to his targets. On a rain-soaked November evening, Trevor Clark arrived with intelligence that made Lloyd's blood run cold. Chad Rodriguez had been killed in prison, not by rival inmates or guards, but by a professional hit ordered from outside. Someone wanted him dead before his appeal hearing, Trevor reported. Word is, he was about to reveal information about international connections that went higher than anyone realized. Lloyd studied the photographs of Chad's body, noting the precise nature of the wounds. This was the work of a true professional, someone with skills comparable to his own team. Who ordered it? That's where it gets interesting, Trevor continued. The contract was paid for by an account traced to Stephanie Rodriguez. She somehow arranged her ex-husband's murder from federal prison. Lloyd's eyes narrowed. Stephanie had always been more cunning than he'd given her credit for, but ordering a hit from maximum security prison required resources and connections she shouldn't have possessed. There's more, Trevor said. Stephanie isn't the mastermind. She's working for someone else, someone who wants both Chad dead and you isolated from any remaining connections to your old life. The answer came in the form of an encrypted message delivered to Lloyd's secure terminal. Meet me at the old warehouse district tomorrow night. Come alone. A friend from your past. Lloyd arrived at the designated location with his full tactical team positioned around the perimeter. The warehouse was dark except for a single light in the center, where a figure waited in the shadows. As Lloyd approached, the figure stepped into the light, and he found himself facing someone he hadn't seen in 5 years. Omar Lane, his former CIA handler who had been running Lloyd's black operations before his arrest. Hello, Lloyd, Omar said casually. You're looking well for a dead man. What do you want, Omar? Lloyd's hand rested on his sidearm, every instinct screaming that this was a trap. To clean up loose ends, Omar replied. Chad Rodriguez knew about operations you ran for us that officially never happened. With his appeal hearing coming up, he was going to expose classified programs to save his own skin. Lloyd's mind raced through the implications. So you had him killed to protect state secrets. Partially. But the real problem isn't what Chad knew. It's what you know. And now that you're operating independently, you've become a liability we can't control. The warehouse suddenly flooded with red laser dots as sniper teams revealed their positions. Lloyd had walked into a kill box designed by professionals who knew exactly how he operated. This is where your story ends, Lloyd, Omar continued. The man who never lost a mission finally faces an impossible one, surviving an elimination order from the very government he once served. Lloyd's voice was calm despite the dozen weapons trained on him. You made one crucial mistake, Omar. And what's that? You assumed I came here to talk. Lloyd smiled and pressed a button on his tactical watch. The warehouse erupted in explosions as Lloyd's team detonated charges they had planted hours earlier. The building's support structure collapsed in a carefully controlled demolition that buried the entire CIA kill team, while Lloyd escaped through a prepositioned tunnel system. Emerging from the underground passage 2 blocks away, Lloyd's phone buzzed with a priority message from his intelligence network. Stephanie Rodriguez found dead in her cell. Apparent suicide. Amelia Rodriguez missing from juvenile facility. Lloyd stared at the message, processing the implications. Stephanie's death eliminated another witness to his past operations, but Amelia's disappearance suggested someone was collecting all the remaining pieces of his former life. Trevor's voice crackled through his earpiece. Boss, we've got a problem. Satellite imagery shows unmarked vehicles surrounding your compound. This is a coordinated operation. Lloyd made a decision that went against every tactical principle he'd ever learned. Instead of retreating to a safe house, he was going to return to his compound and face whatever force was waiting for him. Running would only delay the inevitable, and Lloyd Sears had never run from a fight. As he drove through the rain toward what might be his final battle, Lloyd reflected on how completely his past had come back to haunt him. Everyone who had betrayed him was dead, but their betrayals had created enemies he was only now discovering. The game was far from over, and Lloyd was about to learn that some wars never truly end. They just change battlefields. Chapter 9. The Final Judgment. Lloyd's compound was dark when he arrived, too dark for a facility that maintained round-the-clock security. His thermal scopes revealed multiple heat signatures positioned throughout the perimeter, professional soldiers using equipment that matched his own capabilities. As he approached the main gate, a voice called out from speakers hidden in the darkness. Lloyd Sears, this is Colonel Brian Petty, United States Army Special Operations Command. You are surrounded and have 30 seconds to surrender yourself for questioning in connection with classified operations. Lloyd's response was immediate and decisive. He triggered the compound's defensive systems, flooding the area with blinding strobes while automated weapons systems engaged the surrounding forces. The battle that followed was brief but intense, showcasing why Lloyd Sears had become a legend in the military community. When the smoke cleared, Lloyd stood among the bodies of a dozen special operations soldiers. Colonel Petty lay wounded but alive, his tactical gear shredded by shrapnel. Who sent you? Lloyd demanded, pressing his boot against the colonel's chest wound. Go to hell, Petty gasped. Lloyd's smile was patient. I've been there, Colonel. Let me give you the tour. He applied pressure to the wound until Petty screamed, then eased off. The order came from the Pentagon, didn't it? Someone very high up wants Lloyd Sears permanently silenced. Petty's resistance crumbled as blood loss weakened him. Secretary of Defense, Donnie Lancaster. Your old operations, too sensitive to survive congressional inquiry. Lloyd's blood turned to ice. Donnie Lancaster had been his commanding officer 15 years ago, the man who had recruited him for the CIA's most classified programs. If Lancaster was ordering his elimination, it meant Lloyd knew secrets that could bring down the entire military-industrial complex. Where's the girl? Lloyd pressed. Where's Amelia Rodriguez? Lancaster has her, Petty whispered. Insurance, in case you survive this. Lloyd left the colonel to bleed out and moved to his command center. If Lancaster had Amelia, he was using her as leverage against Lloyd's knowledge of classified operations. The man was betting that Lloyd still felt some connection to his former daughter. He was wrong. Lloyd activated his emergency communication system and sent a message to every major news outlet, Foreign Intelligence Service, and congressional committee he could reach. Secretary of Defense Donnie Lancaster is executing American citizens to cover up war crimes. Evidence packages uploading to secure servers worldwide. The truth about Operation Nightfall, Project Cerberus, and the Kazakhstan protocols will be revealed in 6 hours unless I personally confirm otherwise. Within minutes, his phone rang. Lancaster's voice was calm but strained. Lloyd, let's discuss this rationally. Hello, Donnie. It's been too long. You know why I had to move against you. The operations we ran together, they're too sensitive for congressional review. Too many good people would be destroyed. Including you, Lloyd observed. including all of us. But I have something you care about. A 16-year-old girl who still believes you're her father despite everything you've done. Lloyd's voice was ice. She's not my daughter, Donnie. Never was. If you think threatening Chad Rodriguez's bastard child will buy my silence, you've seriously miscalculated. Silence stretched across the connection before Lancaster spoke again. Jesus Christ, Lloyd. What did they do to you? They taught me that loyalty is weakness and trust is suicide. You're about to learn the same lesson. I'll kill her, Lloyd. Right now, on this call, if you don't abort your document release. Lloyd's response was immediate. Then do it. Kill a child because you're afraid of facing consequences for your own actions. Prove to the world exactly what kind of man you are. More silence, then Lancaster's voice, hollow with disbelief. You really don't care what happens to her. Amelia Rodriguez is the biological daughter of two murderers who used her existence to manipulate me into protecting their crimes. Her death would simply remove the last physical reminder of my greatest failure. Pull the trigger, Donnie. Do me the favor. The line went dead. Lloyd waited exactly 6 hours before confirming the document release. News outlets worldwide simultaneously published evidence of illegal military operations spanning 2 decades. The revelations brought down 3 cabinet members, dozens of generals, and exposed a shadow war program that had operated without congressional oversight. Donnie Lancaster was found dead in his Pentagon office, apparently by suicide. Amelia Rodriguez was discovered unharmed in a safe house outside Washington, released by Lancaster's subordinates who refused to murder a child for their superior's crimes. 3 days later, Lloyd received a final letter from Amelia. This one was different. No pleas for reconciliation, no expressions of love or hope. Just a single sentence written in the careful handwriting of a teenager who had finally accepted reality. I understand now that I never had a father. Lloyd filed the letter with all the others and continued planning his next operation. The girl had finally learned the most important lesson of all. In the end, everyone stands alone. Years later, when journalists asked Lloyd about his complete lack of concern for Amelia's welfare during the Pentagon crisis, his response entered military folklore. Lloyd Sears protects what belongs to him. Everything else is acceptable collateral damage. The man who had once loved a little girl's laugh more than his own life was gone forever. In his place stood something harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. A living weapon forged by betrayal and tempered by absolute ruthlessness. Lloyd Sears had won his war against everyone who had wronged him. But victory had cost him his humanity, leaving only the most efficient killer the world had ever known. And he was completely at peace with that trade.